welcome everyone. I'm your host, Shane Grove, and welcome to the From the Shadows podcast. Before we get into today's episode, I just want to let everybody know, if you want to find out some more about us, you can find us on Facebook at the From the Shadows podcast. You can find us on After the Shadows, which is our forum page on Facebook. You can find me on Instagram at Shane Grove Author. You can find us on our podcast page on Instagram, which is From the Shadows Podcast, or you can do it the old-fashioned way, and you can find us at our website, www.fromtheshadowspodcast.com. Go to the contact button and send me an email if you got something to say, or if you want to share a story and want to come on the show and talk to us about your experiences. We would love to hear from you. I promise I'll read it and get back to you. And all those other ways I mentioned, you can send us a message, and we'll start a conversation, and hopefully you've got something you want to share, and because our audience loves real eyewitness stories. And that being said, today's guest has everything. Not only does he have his own eyewitness stories he's going to share, he also has a podcast, which is a fantastic podcast. And I think Nita, our social media queen, will agree. He is the king of Instagram, TikTok, when it comes to normal. So I'm going to label that and give him the crown. Whether he wants to take up the scepter or put the crown on, that's up to him. So joining us on this episode is Jeff from Strangeology podcast. Jeff, welcome to the program.
Hi, Shane. Thanks for having me on. I'm excited to be here.
Not as excited as I am to have you on, because, like you said before, I'm super excited because, and we'll get into it, but your Instagram and your TikTok pages are some of the most not only entertaining but informative little snippets that we all look forward to in the paranormal world. So my hat's off to you for that, and I hope by the end of this episode that everybody will go and check out everything you have to offer when it comes to that, because they are fantastic.
Well, thank you very much. A lot of work does go into that, for sure, and it's a fun thing to do. I have just a running tally of different topics that I like to transform into these short little snippets, and that's probably the most challenging part, is because with my show I like to do deep dives on Fortean topics, anything from the paranormal, cryptids, UFOs, aliens, forbidden knowledge, ancient mysteries, that kind of thing. And to take some of these topics that I could talk for an hour or two on and do tens of hours of research, condensing that down into 30 to 60 seconds or maybe a little bit longer is probably more challenging than just kind of speaking into the mic for X amount of time and being able to elaborate and go into all the minute details. But it's a fun process, and doing that, I really kind of decided back in the beginning of 2022 to give a real big push to this short form video content, because it seemed like, at least on social media, that was getting a lot of traction. I think some of the platforms were really pushing it at the time. So I was like, okay, I'll jump on the bandwagon, see how this goes, because Strangeology started off as just kind of an Instagram blog, just doing photo posts or carousel posts with some informational slides about cryptid or a certain event like Area 51 or the Betty and Barney Hill incident or the Snallygaster from Maryland. So, and this whole thing that I've been doing for the past few years, it's just kind of evolved in this strange and wonderful organic way, and it's been super fun, and I didn't even have the podcast going at first. I just had the Instagram, and then I got into making a little bit of a merch line for what I do. I'm a graphic designer background. I did that for like 13, 14, 15 years. And then I lost my long-term job at the beginning of the pandemic in 2020. And then this kind of started off as a hobby and then kind of turned into what I was doing all day, every day. And then I saw like a bunch of my friends that I'd made through the community were all doing podcasts. And I was like, that sounds like a fun thing to do. And I really like to look into these topics in depth. So why not? And so I started the podcast at the end of 2020 and I'm in my third season now. There's just so many different facets to what I do.
Well, and I kind of, because usually we have, our form is we talk to eyewitnesses that come on and share their experiences. And I know, like I mentioned, that you yourself have had your own paranormal experiences, which I'm sure is probably what led to your interest in the unknown, in the kind of conspiracy theory themed stuff that you do too. So is that also kind of what propelled you into like, I want to find some more answers and talking to other people that maybe did that help you decide to start the podcast as well?
Oh, absolutely. Absolutely. Yeah. I grew up in a very small town in New England, and there's a lot of old, weird stuff here for sure. I feel like I was always, like many people who get into this kind of subject matter, I always kind of felt myself gravitating towards these kind of topics anyway. I'm not entirely sure why, but I remember being in like elementary school and middle school and always seeking out books about UFOs and Bigfoot and the Loch Ness Monster and checking them out and just reading them and learning all about cryptids and aliens and all this stuff. And these are, I was a child of the late 80s and the 90s. And so these are all these old books from the 50s and 60s. They had dust on them sitting in the library for all these years because no one else wanted to check them out. And I certainly spent a lot of time watching television shows like Sightings or the old In Search Of or any kind of specials like they would come on TV. And then when Monster Quest came out or like UFO Hunters in like the early 2000s, like that was my jam. And so it's always been kind of something that's been an interest of mine. And it's something as well. Before the show started, I had mentioned that I had a few experiences that I could share. And that definitely was something else that has been with me for many, many years and has probably influenced my decision a little bit to start the podcast. And yeah,
I definitely want to. Now, before we get started, I just want to tell you how you don't realize how lucky you were growing up in the 80s and 90s, because I had to grow up in the 70s, and all we had was that old show In Search Of. But it's the same. It's a reoccurring theme amongst a lot of people who do host these podcasts is how much we all love the subject matter, and we just found every book we could, and that's so foreign to the kids these days. I think getting a hold of books
I know.
and reading them. But I mean, I still have all those old books I used to get through the weekly reader program at school, like the ghost books, like you said, and I mean, the one thing that I really loved was the Bermuda Triangle was a big thing in the 70s. And,
Yes.
And even I remember that was the first time I read about Oak Island. And if you'd have told me back then that there'd be a TV show that would go on for 6 years and find very little, but at the same time, I love that show. Okay, because it is a mystery that I have been intrigued about since I was a kid, and the historical stuff, whether or not there's a treasure there, piecing together the historical puzzle, is fascinating to me. So I don't care if they find a treasure. I just love them trying to figure out who was there and at what time period and stuff. So all that stuff, I think, is it's a common theme amongst all of us that are lucky or unlucky enough to have started a podcast to talk about this subject matter, because it's a real search for answers, which I don't know if we're ever going to find them all, but I do want to hear your experiences and how that kind of shaped your view and your journey.
Yeah, absolutely. And, to touch on your point, it's we're all kind of looking for answers. There's a lot that humanity knows, that science knows, but there's even more that we don't know. And, it's coming at it from that frame of reference. You can kind of open your mind a little bit to not maybe knock on people who have these experiences. It's important to have
absolutely
a supportive outlet for that kind of thing. Now, I am the youngest of 4 children in my family. My oldest sister just turned 50 this year, so all of my older siblings are all Gen Xers. They grew up in the 70s. Didn't really get into the paranormal. However, my oldest sister was into Ouija boards for quite a while. And so my family moved to Vermont when I was just a year old in 1985. And the house that we moved to had been abandoned for some time. And my parents put a lot of work into this house over the years. They sold it about 10 years ago, but it was a nice piece of property out in the woods on top of the hill. Great place to grow up. But there was something in that house. Now, when I was growing up, there was always kind of maybe not always, but every so often, if I was ever alone in the house, walking around at night, down a hallway or in the basement or something like that, there was always kind of like a feeling of a presence there, kind of just watching you. And you'd have to kind of walk down the hallway real fast and like go in your room. You get the heebie-jeebies that something was like kind of pacing you, which was interesting. There was an experience growing up in this house that when I was, I think about 8 or 9 years old, I was watching cartoons before bed one evening, and I think my mom yelled from the kitchen, like, "Jeff, time to turn off the TV and go to bed." And I was like, okay. So I turned off the TV, and it's like, I don't know, Looney Tunes, like Wile E. Coyote and Roadrunner or Bugs Bunny or something like that on the TV. I turn off the TV, and it's the old cathode ray tube style TV, not the flat screens we have today. And there was a face of an old man in the afterglow looking at me. And I was like, that's something. I'm not going to acknowledge it, and I'm just going to walk out of the room. And later on, I was looking through some old family photo albums, and I saw a picture of my grandfather, my dad's dad, who had passed away shortly after I was born. He had stomach cancer, and he was on his way out. my parents never made it down to get me there to meet him in time. I think he was dying, so he didn't want to like have the heartbreak of meeting his new grandson or something like that. So like I saw this picture and I was like, that looks just like the face that was looking at me on the TV. So I've always kind of like framed that as like, oh, that was Grandpa John checking in on me or something like that, because I never met him.
Just watching you, making sure you're okay.
Yeah. It was an elderly looking man in his 60s with glasses, male pattern baldness, looked just like pictures I've seen of my Grandpa John. So, maybe the screen switched last second, but I was watching cartoons. There's no way there'd be an old man's face there. So, that was kind of an interesting thing. Now, the house I grew up in also had some other interesting, let's say, paranormal activity that was going on there as well. I mentioned before that my oldest sister was into Ouija boards for a while. There was one day, I don't recall the time of year it was. I think it was during the school year. And I was probably around the same age, 7, 8, 9 years old. And she and my brother were messing around with it, and whatever entity they were allegedly interacting with said it was my grandfather, which was weird. I don't know if they were messing with me, but in the context of my experience I just mentioned, I was just like, whoa, that's kind of weird and interesting. And then that same evening, we wound up getting a bunch of like prank phone calls happening around dinner time. And my parents had this rule. They're like, no one calls the house at dinner time. This is family time. You can pick up the phone and say, call back later, and that's it. And so like my sister went and picked up the phone, and she's like, I think it's just like there's like no one really there. So she like hung up, and then it kept ringing and it kept ringing. And eventually I was like, oh, I want to answer the phone, little kid Jeff. And I go answer the phone. I'm like, hello. And there was this ghostly voice on the other line asking for somebody named Cal. And there's nobody with that name in my family or extended family. So it was really weird. And I was just like, click, hung up. And I was like, oh, that was weird. And then the calls stopped at that point. Now, there were some other incidents that I did not experience personally, but heard from like my dad and my brother of beds shaking in the middle of the night in the house. And there was one evening where my dad, I guess he woke up and the bed was shaking, and he heard this voice whisper his name. And the room was like ice cold. And this was like summertime. And so he was just like freaked out, like, oh God, what's going on? And I think eventually it stopped. And the theory was that whatever this kind of playful trickster thing that was happening may have been the spirit of high school, or a recently graduated high school student. So the guy who built the house, he built it in the early 70s, and he had a son who graduated at some point in the 70s from high school, and he passed away. He died shortly after in a motorcycle accident. And so they were thinking that it was the spirit of this kid that had some connection to the house still, came back there, and liked to mess around every once in a while. And my dad believed it because he, one night when the bed was shaking, because this happened several times over the course of a few years, he was like, the kid's name was Dean Fencer, apparently. And he was like, Dean, like, please stop. I don't want to play anymore. This isn't fun. I need to sleep. I have work in the morning, like whatever. And it's just like the activity just stopped. And like the room heated back up to normal room temperature. And he never experienced anything like that again in the house. Totally bizarre. And then there was this other incident where I remember waking up and walking out into our living room, and we had this old fireplace and a mantle above it had all my mom's knickknacks and a couple of family portraits on it. And we had this larger portrait hanging above the mantle. It was like a nice little nature scene with some ducks flying in it, right? And I come out there in the morning. The large portrait is face down on the living room floor, which is carpeted. And the nail is still at a 45-degree angle in the wall. Nothing is knocked off of the fireplace mantle. The glass on the photo frame is not broken. So something in the middle of the night lifted this thing up and placed it down gently on the carpet. I can't imagine like my parents were, I don't know, moving photos or like portraits around or anything like that, because they would watch the news, watch their sitcoms, and go to bed at like 9:30 every night. You know, so they weren't messing around with pictures or anything.
Yeah, they don't sound like party animals. All right.
Yeah, so that was a weird experience. Yeah. Now, did you ever tell did your dad know the story of you believing you saw your grandpa's face in the TV? You know, I can't recall if I've ever mentioned that to him. I want to say back when we were like, I was watching my siblings mess around with a Ouija board. I think they had like said something to him, but yeah, no, I don't think I've ever mentioned that to my dad.
Because when you're telling, when you're talking about the story and somebody like shaking his bed and calling his name, I immediately am like, is that his dad? Like trying to get his attention?
That's a possibility. It's a possibility. Yeah. I mean, he thought it was this kid that died and was still connected to the house, which, who knows exactly, what this stuff is or who they are, where they come from. But something happened. And I guess my brother had that happen to him a couple times too. But yeah, there was some other interesting stuff that happened out there at that property as well, involving ghost lights. Which, are you familiar with ghost lights, like the Marfa lights or the Hestelian lights?
Yeah. I've heard those stories and stuff.
Yeah. So I was outside one evening. My folks got a above ground swimming pool in the early 90s, and it was late summer, I believe, and it was dark out. I think the sun had just set, so it was probably like 7:30 or something like that on the weekend. And my mother had her best friend over, and they were sitting on the pool deck smoking cigarettes, just chit-chatting. And I was swimming in the pool. They were making sure I wasn't going to drown because I was like, same age range, like 7 to 9. And I'm diving under the water because at that time of night, the bats would come out and they'd swoop down and pick off all the dead bugs that would find themselves in the swimming pool. And so I was getting dive bombed by bats, and I was just like having a good time, I guess. And I come up for air, and just to kind of, I guess, backtrack a little bit, the property itself was like a long rectangle. The house was kind of like in the middle. We had like a front field, long driveway, and then like a little bit of a shorter backyard. That's where the pool was. And so we had this like straight line of trees around each side of the property. And I'm looking towards the northern edge beyond where the pool is when I get up, and just like out of nowhere, this orange, I want to say like beach ball sized glowing light zipped through the forest to my left, or like the western side of the property. And it just went north to south really quick within like maybe 2 to 3 seconds. And I kind of didn't acknowledge it at first kind of like how I didn't acknowledge the face in the TV that was looking at me. And I was just like, okay, that was kind of weird. Maybe I was hallucinating or something. And so I went about my business for a few more minutes, and then I was looking for some reason, maybe it was intuition, but looking towards the southerly direction, the same light, or maybe it was the same, I don't know, came back, zipping back from the other direction. Now, I don't know how this thing was maneuvering because the trees were pretty thick, but it was just like zoop, and it was gone. So I've kind of associated that with being some kind of ghost light. And sometimes ghost lights are associated with swamps. We had a little bit of a swamp in our woods out back. So I don't know if it was some kind of earth energy or if it was something paranormal or interdimensional, extraterrestrial. I couldn't tell you, but I saw this weird orange glowy light going through the woods, and it was probably a good 10, 15 feet in the air too. It was just a totally bizarre experience.
Did your mom or her friend even acknowledge it, or did they see it at all?
They didn't say anything about it. Nah, and after I saw it the second time, I was like, Mom, I'm going inside. Like, I was like, I'm done. And I just like went inside. I think as like a little kid, I don't know if I just thought I was imagining things or what. Well,
at this point, you've been visited by your dead grandpa, dive bombed by suicidal bats, and now you're seeing a ghost light. And I would go and hide under my bed too if I was you.
Oh yeah.
I mean, that's a lot of stuff to process as a 7, 8, 9-year-old. You know what I'm saying?
No, exactly. And I'll tell you, like when I was a kid, even as a teenager, you know, watching shows about alien abductions and stuff like that, my mom had this book. I want to say it was from shoot, I just saw someone talking about this book on TikTok the other day, and I can't remember if she ordered it from like Unsolved Mysteries store or something back in the day, but it had like a story in it about this alien abduction scenario that happened, and the name of the case is escaping me right now, but they had this 2-page spread illustration in it of this car parked. It was very similar to like the Betty and Barney Hill case, and this couple in this car like looking totally frightened, and this humanoid looking alien, but it wasn't human because it had like red eyes or something and weird ears and I think antenna like up on the windshield, like looking in at them. That freaked the crap out of me as a kid. So I was always like scared of like alien abduction and stuff as a kid.
Oh my goodness.
I mean, I don't know who wouldn't be, but
that's some heavy. I mean, that's heavy stuff for a kid to have on his mind. You know what I'm saying? That's some real stuff.
Yeah, absolutely.
So did you have some? You know, has there been some UFO experiences in your life?
Yeah. Interestingly enough, I mean, would you be surprised at this point? But yes, and it's nothing that I ever went looking for. You hear people look their whole lives, or they want to go out and see a UFO. Sometimes they do, they get lucky, but more often than not, it's something that just happens randomly. And I'm not sure what the reason is, but the first time that I saw something in the sky that I was kind of like scratched my head at, I was I think I was about 13, and I was riding my bike around one of the local neighborhoods. My dad used to take me out so I could ride my bike, and I was looking up at the sky, and I saw this silvery object like way up, like near the clouds, and I was like, oh, it's a plane. I'm gonna look at it for a second. And it went behind this cloud, and it wasn't like a gigantic cloud bank that just went on for miles. It was just like a singular, like, what do you call it? Like a cumulus cloud. And I saw it go behind the cloud, and it was going at like a pretty good clip, and it never came out the other side. And I was just like, well, that was weird. Was that a UFO? It was probably a plane. I don't know. maybe it banked and went a different direction, but that kind of, influenced me to look at the skies a little more, I guess. But when was it? It must have been that same year, or maybe that was when I was 12. I can't remember the exact year, but this one, what happened in 1997, I had just gone to go see the re-release of Empire Strikes Back with my brother. He was 20 at the time. I was 13, 14. And we're driving back. It's like 9 o'clock at night. It's a clear, starry night. And you can either take the interstate highway to like get back to my house and take some back roads, or you can go all back roads. And my brother loved driving. He fancied himself as an amateur like rally car driver, or wanted to be one. So we were driving in his old Volvo 240, and we get to this point on the route home, and it's this straightaway that goes for, I think, about a mile, maybe a little more, maybe a little less, give or take. And I'm sitting in the back seat because I wanted to kind of like lay down and rest, but I sat up, and I see right before the straightaway ends, there's this bank of trees. The road dips down a sharp corner and goes down into this river valley. And I see right over the tree line where this junction in the road happens, there's these 3 lights, boom, 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 in a triangular formation. And at first I'm like, oh man, that plane is flying super low. And we're pretty close to the Burlington International Airport in Vermont, but it's not along a normal flight path. I've never seen a plane flying that low, that far away from the airport, or in this particular area. And so I was just kind of looking at it for a couple seconds. I was like, what's that thing doing? It's not moving. It's just kind of hovering over the trees. And I'm looking around inside the back of the car. I'm like, maybe it's like a reflection. I'm like trying to like debunk this myself as a 13-year-old, right? Like always kind of looking for like the answer. And there's no running lights or any kind of weird lights that my brother had hooked up in his car. And he's just driving, not saying anything. And I roll down the window to make sure it wasn't a reflection. Sure enough, those lights are still in the sky, just hovering over the trees. Maybe, I want to say the trees are probably about 50 feet high. They're probably maybe like 20, 30 feet above the trees. So this is like really low to the ground. And we're getting closer to this thing, and I'm trying to get my brother's attention. I'm like, John, what's going on here? And we eventually get to it. And meanwhile, my brother's trying to like shut me up. He's like, don't worry about it. Like, whatever, I'm just driving. And we get to the bend in the road that goes into the woods and down to the river valley. I'm looking out the window at this thing, Shane, and it's just like, these lights are huge. I can see one of them clearly. One of them's a little bit obscured, and the other one I can't really see through the trees. And I notice that it's a solid object. It's not 3 individual ones. It's one solid triangular object, because you can't see the stars through the middle of it. And I mean, at the time, I was familiar with the Belgian UFO wave with all the triangular ships that people were seeing. Yeah. And it looked very much like that, minus there wasn't like a red. Some of these things are depicted or are reported as having like a red light in the center of the triangle. I didn't see that with this particular one, but we kept driving and went home, never talked about it. And
never even
until 2011 at a family get together, somebody was talking about UFOs or ancient aliens or something like that. And my brother was like, oh, Jeff and I saw a UFO like years ago when we were driving back from the movies one night. I was like, you saw that too. You made me think I was crazy. And that was just like an eye-opening experience. And I remember when Google Earth came out and there were measurement tools, one of the first things I did was go to the area where this sighting happened and to kind of try to remember exactly where the lights were in relation to the trees. There were a couple houses nearby too. And I'm pretty sure this thing was like the size or maybe bigger than a 747 jet.
Wow.
Pretty big. Yeah. So that was kind of like a big thing. And I told a few people about it, over the years, as friends, girlfriends, and stuff like that. And they're like, you didn't see anything. You're crazy. And I was just like, I know what I saw. And maybe it was military. I don't know. But I saw something in the sky that night. I mean, people say that the triangles are like the TR3B, whatever. But who knows?
Well, and I think it's kind of cool that your brother was really trying to downplay the whole incident and be the big brother, kind of like be the big brother that he was, and maybe protect you from
I think
whatever.
That's what the intention was. Yeah.
And because I'm sure if he saw the same thing you saw in the same context, he was probably scared of his mind. But what's he supposed to do? Like act scared around you? You're he's supposed to take care of you, and I do like those the whole triangle thing. I often wonder, like, especially from the 70s and 80s, like, were people seeing like the testing of like the stealth or something, because there's never any sound or anything. And those almost, are triangle in shape, but I don't think they're even anywhere close to the size that you are describing,
Yeah, it was big. And I had the window rolled down, and I don't remember hearing any noise or humming or anything like that coming from this thing. And it was 80 feet above us or something like that. You think you'd hear something, but
yeah, and even then I don't know that there was the technology that would just allow anything to just hover there that we had, or that we were supposed to have. Because that's the thing, is even if it, you're witnessing it in that time period, that's something that would be out now, like they would eventually come out, and that would be something that the Air Force had and was using, if they were testing it 20 some years ago.
You think of like the F-117 Nighthawk or the B-2 stealth bomber, which became widely known in the first Gulf War, or even like the late 80s when they kind of announced them. But those were being developed in the late 60s, early 70s,
Yeah.
So
yeah,
20 years, it's been 26 years or so since I saw this thing.
Where is my jetpack, right? That's the whole, like, where's my jetpack?
Apparently illegal miners in Peru have all the jetpacks.
Yeah. So what's going on in Peru? I saw that. I've seen the headlines, and I have not, because I got to be honest, sometimes, you mentioned doing this is become your full-time gig, so to speak, and you spend a lot of full time. Well, for us mere mortals that still have other full-time gigs, I get so much information sent to me, and I don't have a chance to look at it all, and I miss some stuff unless, like I said, Nita, the aforementioned Nita, says, "Hey, you need to read this." So I've seen some of the stuff going on in Peru, and then I saw your video clip that you put up. What the heck's going on?
Yeah, so apparently back in June, this village in the Alto, I think it's Nanay, I think I pronounced it wrong in the video, but Alto Nanay province, which is in the Amazon in Peru, these villagers started reporting that they were being attacked like nightly by what seemed to be aliens or other worldly entities. They were talking about these creatures that they called Los Paracaros, which means face peelers. And the reason behind that was because there was a video of this guy, this unfortunate dude, who had fallen into a river, and his face got eaten off by, I think, piranhas or something like that. And there's a pretty gruesome video of it. And people were like, oh, it's just a mask. It's just fake. No, it's not. This guy got messed up. And but there's some interesting details about that where people think that what happened to him almost looked surgical and not like something that an animal would do. So there's still, I think the jury's still out on whether or not this was just an unfortunate mishap or there was something else at play. And apparently that happened a while ago before this incident. That's what people are telling me, at least in the comments section on my videos. But yeah, so I guess the village leaders of this place, and this village is, I've read, about a 10-hour boat ride up a river from the nearest city, which I think is called Iquitos. And they're saying that these things are like 7 feet tall. They're shooting bullets at them, and it's not doing anything. Like they're wearing armor. Some of them describe them as looking kind of like the Green Goblin from Spider-Man movies from like the early 2000s, like the Tobey Maguire Spider-Man. And these things are coming to attack people. There was a teenage girl that got attacked and had her neck cut by one of these things before she was rescued. And I think there's some UFO footage that's starting to surface of like weird lights in the sky, although it's not entirely clear where it's from. I think there's one that I saw today that was taken south of Lima, Peru, which is very far away from where this village is. It's in the desert area near the Pacific coast. So possibly related, maybe not. But whatever these things are in this village, they have yellow eyes, and they're seen to be levitating like a meter off the ground, which is really interesting. Really reminds me of the story of the Kelly Hopkinsville goblins, the Kelly Little Green Men story from the 50s. If you're familiar, I'm sure your listeners, and you are very familiar with that story, where this group of creatures, after a UFO was like seen in the area, came to this rural home and kind of rained havoc on this family. And they were shooting at these things, and the bullets made a ricocheting sound, and then they'd kind of like knock back or fade out and disappear and then come back for more. And that's what people were apparently reporting with this case. Now, the official story for it is that this was like a group of an illegal mining cartel that was trying to scare villagers away. So they're getting dressed up as aliens and using jetpacks to,
I asked for my jetpack and you delivered. Right there you go. Like, isn't that kind of extreme? I mean, it sounds like this village is so far out in the middle of nowhere that would you have to go to that level of shenanigans to scare them?
I mean, know it's like a Scooby-Doo episode.
Like, would you just take what you want? Because at first, when I saw this, I'm like, okay, is this just another version of what happened in Las Vegas earlier, where there's there's aliens in the backyard and the police come, and turns out that it really may not have been, what those people claimed. And I'm like, is this what's going on? But now that you describe it, it's like, it doesn't sound that way at all. Because if you're 10 miles from or 10 hours from the near, is that what you said? 10? Was it
10-hour boat ride? Yeah.
Hey, would they even know? Would they even have a frame of reference? Like, I can't believe that they're even comparing something to the Green Goblin.
Right.
Like how would they even know that?
Yeah. Well, they at the very least have cell phones that can take video and maybe some satellite internet access or something like that, because they were able to request aid from like the Peruvian military to come in and help them out. But yeah, it's almost like, I don't know, that like the official explanation seems stranger than if it was some kind of like alien encounter, like the Colares Brazil case back in the late 70s, or even the Varginha case in the 90s in Brazil as well. You know, it's just kind of silly. So, you know, some people are like, oh, it's a PSYOP, it's Project Bluebeam. Is there a cover-up going on? You know, I think the story's still developing, but, you know, a lot of the, you know, people in the comment sections turn into experts on stuff really quickly, which is fun to watch, you know.
Don't like. Well, in fact, the video that you put up, what was the one comment? The person said something about, well, UFO would have no reason to use white lights. And I'm like, how do you know that at all? You know, it's so irritating.
I know.
Because if you know something, buddy, don't just hide in the comments. Hit Jeff up in the DMs and get on the show and expose what you know about the engineering and of UFOs and aliens that fly these UFOs, and why not they might not use white lights. I find that amazing.
It's all pretty silly and entertaining for sure. A lot of people, you know, just don't want to open their mind to that kind of thing, and that's all well and good, and you just kind of say your piece and move on. You know, it's what can you do?
Well, so I mentioned, okay, so some of these little video clips I need to know, because you said there's more than just 30 or 60 seconds. There was a couple that were recent that I was like, okay, the Max Headroom conspiracy one where it just showed up on, was it the cable access channel? What is that story, and where did you find that?
Okay, so the Max Headroom incident is kind of a silly story, and it's part of this this ultimate conspiracy iceberg that I found that I'm working on making short form videos for all of my platforms and channels, just kind of talking about what each of these things are, the ones that are like the most interesting, and ones that won't get me banned from the internet because they're too controversial. So the Max Headroom case, I guess what happened was back in 1987, the Channel 9 Chicago news station had their TV signal intercepted or interrupted, hijacked by some anonymous person around 9 o'clock in the evening. It was during the sportscast. The sportscaster at the time was this guy named Dan Roan. And all of a sudden, the signal goes out, and this guy in a Max Headroom mask comes on the screen, and he's got this like corrugated like sheet metal behind him spinning around to kind of like make it look like the old laser lights from the TV show. And Max Headroom was like a famous like British TV character, supposed to be this like artificial intelligence or whatever that did like the weird kind of like head clicky thing. I think there was like
British. He was what was he a spokesperson for? Like, was it
Pepsi?
Pepsi or something? I think
it was
that?
Pepsi.
And there was a TV show. He had a TV show before you were born. That was awful. But I don't even know how long it lasted. But it was. Oh God, it was so bad.
Wasn't there a Max Headroom cameo in one of the Back to the Future movies when I think it was in Back to the Future 2 when Marty goes to the year 2015 or whatever.
Oh, I'm sure.
I think there was. He
didn't even last to the year 1987.
Yeah.
So,
and so I guess this feed got hijacked, and it lasted for about 30 seconds before the station crew were able to like change the frequency to get this person off the air, because it was just like weird buzzing, and he was like saying all this like weird stuff, hard to make out. You can actually watch the whole like segment of videos on YouTube, but I guess like 2 hours later, the same person intercepted and hijacked a PBS affiliate feed that was playing Doctor Who at the time.
Oh, okay. All right.
And this time the signal was a little clearer, and he was talking about all sorts of weird stuff. I think someone else who was there with him threw what was it, like new Coke, a can of new Coke or something, probably making fun of the Pepsi
Mm-hmm.
the Pepsi ads. And he put like a glove on at one point, and he was just like, yeah, it was just weird. And at the end, the other person that was there with him took a fly swatter, and he pulled down his pants on TV and started smacking him. And then the feed got cut. I think this second time he managed to get it on the air was, I think, about 2 minutes or something like that before they were able to cut the feed. And so to this day, allegedly nobody knows who did it.
Oh, somebody knows.
But someone in the comment section on my Instagram was like, "Oh, I know who it was," and so do a few other people that I know, but we're not going to say who it is. Like, last person standing will reveal it. And I guess a couple years ago there was some Reddit sleuths that were really trying to get to the bottom of who done it.
So this is like one of those that it's like, come on, man, just come forward. I mean, it's not like you're going to jail or anything. Like just help us out. And wouldn't that be a great story? Like, okay, how did you do it? Why did you do it? What was you know what I'm saying? That would be so fascinating to hear that, you know?
Yeah, it would be. And maybe we'll find out someday. Like, there was a whole FCC investigation, like criminal investigation that happened after, but they never found the guy or his accomplice. But yeah, it would be interesting to find out. And maybe there's a statute of limitations on this person getting fined or something.
I would imagine
it's
dressing up Smackstepper.
Yeah.
I mean, just, I don't know. Maybe there's a fine for just exhibiting very poor taste in cultural icons. Maybe. I don't know.
Right. Yeah. Yeah.
Well, so you do all these things. What has been, while you're digging into research and stuff, what's been one or two of the really craziest stories that you've kind of uncovered that you had no idea existed or was out there?
Oh gosh, I would probably say one of the weirdest stories, and I have an episode about it on my podcast, and I've done a few short form videos, which actually went pretty viral on my Instagram and catapulted my followership by leaps and bounds, we'll say, was the Tartarian Empire conspiracy. Are you familiar with that?
What is that one?
Okay, so this one is a conspiracy based on some old world maps that show the landmass of Asia, pretty much where Russia is now. Was called Tartaria, however you want to pronounce it, Great Tartaria. It was this whole section of Asia that wasn't mapped, and the official explanation is that that was just what Europeans called it, because there weren't any civilizations there. Now, this is like kind of like the same area where the Mongol Empire, got its roots in and took over a quarter of the world in the 1200s. And so there's this whole conspiracy that maybe that never went away, and the Tartarians developed this global influential nation, this civilization that was supposedly hyper advanced. And one of the theories is that this civilization developed free energy technology that harnessed energy from the atmosphere, that they would have all these old Gothic style cathedral buildings and stuff that have these huge spires on them that were supposedly like the energy collectors. It's such there's so many different facets to this theory. And the reason why we don't know about it now, according to the theory, is that there was a massive global mud flood. So you'll hear the mud flood in Tartaria in conjunction with each other a lot. And this like natural disaster wiped out a lot of the Tartarian cities around the world. And at that point in time, the like big oil was getting its footing, and they wanted to cover up the free energy aspect of it all. And it's just a really bizarre rabbit hole to go down. There's other things like the World's Fair. Are you familiar with like the old World's Fairs? They still happen today, but apparently back in the 1800s, these World's Fairs, basically like these small cities, would be built and deconstructed or burned down. And people were like, oh, they were burning them down to, they were actually Tartarian cities, and they were burned down to be like covered up or something like that.
Really? Yeah, okay.
And, another part of like the mud flood part of the theory is that have these underground labyrinths where the street level of the city used to be a lot lower. There's a place like this in Chattanooga, Tennessee, Seattle, Washington. I've actually been to the Seattle Underground.
Chattanooga, Tennessee had a World's Fair in 1980.
Yeah. And apparently the story behind this underground is that no one knew who built it. But my guess is that it flooded a whole bunch from the rivers nearby, and they just needed to raise the street level. That's what happened in Seattle, because they built near like the Puget Sound, and it wasn't really good land for building on, so it flooded all the time.
There's like a whole underground city under Seattle, right? That if you get, you can go down, and it's like, who was it? Don Wildman, who did Cities of the Underworld. I remember seeing an episode of that where, and they said that's where the old saying is getting shanghaied came from, was because most people didn't know these catacombs in this other city was beneath the city of Seattle, and they would, you'd be in a bar, get drunk, and these basically pirates, people that were running these ships, would take you down a trap door and spirit you underneath the city out to the boat. And then you'd have to, once you got out in the sea, you were stuck, and you had to work on the ship that was going to China, and or Japan, and they just say you got shanghaied.
Right. No, it's there's a whole really cool history for Seattle, at least. And I've done the tour before. They take you on, a guided area that's limited to a very, very specific path that you can get to. But I'm sure there's way more that's still under there. And maybe people live down there. I don't know. Think about all sorts of other cities. I'm sure there's stuff under New York City and probably Boston and all these old cities and stuff. So, it's a very interesting theory. I don't really, after looking into it and being, somewhat into history myself, I think that it's a little bit of a far-fetched theory, but there's a lot of people that are very, very passionate about it and a lot more well-researched into it than I am, for sure. There's also, are you familiar with what star forts are?
No, the star fort. Oh, my gosh.
These were like Renaissance structures where different kingdoms and principalities would build castles, and they would terraform the land around it to be 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10-sided star structure for like defensive points. In this like walled city castle thing. They're pretty cool to look at for sure. And there's a ton of them in Europe. There were star forts built in the Revolutionary War period in North America and Canada. You can find them pretty much anywhere. And a lot of people who are proponents of this theory believe that those were Tartarian structures as well. There was also in the late 1800s, which is supposed to be like the mud flood is said to have happened around like the mid 1800s or so. And afterwards, there was the westward expansion in the United States, right? After the Civil War, a lot of people were moving out west to find their fortunes and fame and glory. And there were transcontinental railroads built across the country, and there were all these trains. I think by like the 1880s and 1890s, that they called orphan trains, and a lot of children lost their parents to things like tuberculosis and other diseases, and they would be sent out west to families that were looking for children, or to potentially religious places, churches, other orphanages and stuff like that. And there's just like tons of these kids being sent out for years and years that didn't have parents. And this is real history, but the Tartarian theorists believe that a lot of the history was able to be erased about Tartaria, because these children were the children of Tartarians, and their parents were killed off in the mud flood or taken out by other means, and they shipped them out to all these other places, and so they couldn't learn their history and who they really were, type of thing. So, that's kind of a big
that is a huge leap. Right?
Yeah.
So okay, because gosh, I could quiz you for another 2 hours on conspiracies and some of this stuff, because I think you probably have a little or a lot of knowledge on way too much stuff. But so I want to ask you, because my good friend Stacy Brown, I know he's an avid listener of our show, and he would be mad if I did not ask you: moon landing, real or faked?
The moon landing, I believe, happened. I think that there is plenty of solid evidence to show the remnants of what we left there from going there. And the moon landing conspiracy, gosh, that was probably like one of like the first big ones besides like JFK that I remember getting into and looking into. But pretty much anything that is thrown at it saying it was faked can be debunked soundly. Now, we haven't been back to the moon since what, 1972, 1973?
Something like that. Yeah.
Why haven't we been back? Sure, we won the space race, but allegedly we lost the technology to go back. They burned all the papers and the data on how to do this. It's not in the budget, or there's no desire. Who cares? I mean, there's helium-3 on the moon. That's huge business. There could be trillionaires made mining that stuff and bringing it back to Earth. There's some interesting audio from the Apollo missions and even testimony from some of the astronauts where they're saying, like, there's something out there following us or something watching us. Like, who's up there? Is that the aliens, whoever they are? Do they have a base up there? Is it a breakaway civilization? I don't know. That's kind of where I go with that theory. I'm pretty sure we went, but there might have been some kind of confrontation up there. I don't know.
Well, there's got to be a reason we haven't gone back. And I tease Stacy because he's been on our show and we've talked about it and stuff. And I think he firmly believes that we probably did go, but a lot of the footage they claim was from the actual first steps on the moon and all that was not really shot on the moon. That probably was all shot on a soundstage, and that maybe we did go, but that not much of the actual video evidence is real as far as having happened on the moon at the time.
Right, yeah. I think there's some possibility to that, and there's the whole theory that Stanley Kubrick was involved in filming the faking of the moon landing and that kind of thing. And there's the issue of like the traveling through the Van Allen radiation belts and stuff like that. But I imagine they would have used some kind of shielding for their film canisters or something like that. But yeah, it's
super interesting. It's super interesting. So, the one thing that we haven't even touched on is where you're at in Vermont. What's the Bigfoot situation there?
What's the Bigfoot situation? Wow. Yeah. Well, there's certainly been sightings. I've never seen one myself. But I live just a couple hours away from Whitehall, New York, which is basically on the state line with Vermont. And there was the infamous Beast of Whitehall encounter back in the 70s, early 80s, and with local law enforcement encountering this thing. And I've spoken with some other researchers who think there could be, some kind of corridor that these things come up through the rural areas in upstate New York and through Vermont, which is mostly rural. There's only 500,000 people that live in this state, and most of them are in Chittenden County. So it's, I would say, very easy for a Bigfoot type of creature to remain elusive. Now, there's a story from a resident who lives in the northern part of Vermont. I don't remember the exact town, but if you look on a map and you look for Newport, that general area, and he had some story when he was a teenager where he had a snowmobile and he had rode out. I think he was probably like 16 or something like that. And he went to his girlfriend's house to hang out. And it was getting time to go home, and there was a little bit of a snowstorm happening, I think. And he was going to take his snowmobile back home, ride we have a network of trails called the Vast Trails in Vermont. And so he's riding out there. He's got his snow machine headlight on, and he's coming up an incline, and all of a sudden he sees this towering humanoid, hairy creature standing there right on the edge of the trail looking at him. He could see the hair on his body blowing in the wind, and it just kind of stared at him. and walked in the woods, and he was like, like gunned the thing to get out of there. So there's certainly stories of Bigfoot happening in Vermont. The frequency of which I'm not sure how much. There was another story in this same region of Vermont where there was a woman who lived on this house on some property, and there was a long dirt road that she lived on, and she was outside one summer day and she heard something coming up the road, and she went out there and saw this tall humanoid Bigfoot looking thing with dark shaggy fur, hair, whatever it is, walking up the road. And she went back in her house and didn't want to deal with it. So yeah, a lot of people see things, and people in Vermont, they don't really talk too much. They keep to themselves.
Yeah, I get that I lived in Massachusetts for a little while, and that's kind of you get that sense, especially when you get out of the metropolitan areas. The people that live out in the country, out in the woods, out in the mountains, sort of when you get into Vermont, they're kind of hardy, solitary kind of people that are like, look, we got to fend for ourselves, and I don't even have time to believe in that sort of stuff, because if it is real, I don't have time to deal with it anyway. I'm too busy staying warm in the winter or something.
Exactly.
That's kind of way. But having just been out in that region, it's kind of like dare I say, a more sophisticated version of West Virginia, where as you drive through, you're like, if there's a Bigfoot, it's here somewhere. Like the terrain and the cover and the resources, especially like in the Vermont, upstate New York, where there's lakes all over the place. So there's all kinds of wildlife and food sources and stuff.
Oh, yeah.
And
tons of deer.
Yes, it's super fascinating. But Jeff, I can't thank you enough for us finally nailing down a time for you to come on and join me on the show. I want you to tell everybody where they can go find you and become super fans of all your hard work, because I think people will become addicted to your TikTok and your Instagram stuff, because it is fantastic. Because you could take each one of your little episodes and just go do a whole couple hours worth of research on your own, if you wanted to. That's the cool thing. Like, yes. I think you just scratch the surface for people enough to get them all excited to go do their own sort of investigation.
Exactly. Or have some groundwork laid to do a whole episode of the podcast. So Thanks again for having me on. People can go to my website, Strangeology.com. That's my home base. I've got a blog there. On social media, I'm on Instagram, TikTok, Facebook, Threads, the app formerly known as Twitter.
Yes.
X. I also have a YouTube channel as well. And I'm pretty much everywhere. You can find me. I also have an Etsy shop where I do all my own merch designs. I've got T-shirts and hoodies and pins and stickers and all sorts of goodies if you're into cryptids and aliens, UFOs, general Fortiana. So, yeah, check it out.
Yeah. So I encourage everybody, go check out Strangeology. Follow them, listen to the podcast, check out, Jeff's little videos, and they are great, because I know the amount of work that goes into that stuff. That's why I don't do them, but I appreciate the fact that he does do them, and just go enjoy them and scratch your paranormal conspiracy itch on all his stuff, because it's great.
Thank you for tuning in to this week's episode of the From the Shadows podcast. Until next time, never shy away from the darkness or what may be lurking in the shadows. We are out.